event. Could I start by just saying, shall we just all remember to mute our phones so we don't interrupt the fantastic conversation that we're going to hear this evening. Hello, my name is Professor Jane Milling and I'm Head of the Department of Communications, Drama and Film. And it's a real pleasure to welcome you here this evening and to our fantastic guests. To welcome Nick and Anthony and George with us. Thank you so much for being with us here. Now, they haven't just been with us this evening, they've been hard at work. We've been working with the bone all afternoon. They've been working with our students in workshop, doing coaching and mentoring and offering a little bit of their wisdom and experience, an amazing sort of gift to our students, to some lucky students. One of the privileges of being a university is that we have hundreds of undergraduate and postgraduate students, home and international, who come because they want to take that next step on their life journeys and their career paths. And having fantastic folks like you guys coming here is such a fantastic gift to them and to us. So we just want to say thank you so much for being here with us. The workshops this afternoon went amazingly. Everyone's really buzzing about them. And then, of course, those students, they go off out into the world and they form this incredible mesh. Across the globe, we have alumni working in 80 countries across the globe and here in the UK as well, making real change in our cultural world around us. And actually, our three guests this evening undertook a similar journey, which we'll be hearing much more from them about. They moved out from the University of Exeter to go and change our culture and rock our world. So our three guests this evening are George Stiles, Anthony Drewe, who are award-winning musical theatre creators. They're a partnership who began here at Exeter. You met and began working here at Exeter 40 years ago. And now their musicals are seen all over the world and are translated into hundreds of languages. They were responsible for, you just have to kind of wait for the list that's coming now, okay? They're responsible for new songs and additional music and lyrics for the international Cameron Mackintosh and Disney smash hit Mary Poppins, the Olivier award-winning musical, in fact 45 award-winning, I think it was, musical that opens its new tour at the Bristol Hippodrome, opened on Monday. I think that one, so go see. I think there are just 1 or 2 tickets left for that one, but not many. Their scores include the Olivier award-winning Honk, which has been seen by 7 million people in 9,000 productions across the globe. And their recent West End shows have included Half a Sixpence and Wind in the Willows. Their most recent musical, Identical, is an adaptation of The Parent Trap, which was directed by Trevor Nunn at Nottingham Playhouse. And they've Becoming Nancy, with director and choreographer, Jerry Mitchell, has just finished, we've just missed that one, has just finished its UK premiere at the Birmingham Rep. Pure joy, the reviewers said. Independently, they work independently as well. George is an award-winning composer and has co-produced Toby Marlowe and Lucy Moss's musical Six in the West End and on international tour, and co-produced their next West End musical, Why Am I Still Single? Fantastic, fantastic piece. Anthony is a director and lyricist, and his credits include The Card, Twist of Fate, and has just written the book and lyrics for Freak the Mighty, a really remarkable novel actually by Rodman Philbrick, and that's Broadway, I think, and next Junkyard Dogs, fantastic, and the children's show The Good Hair Day, a very wonderful thing. Stiles and Drewe are also patrons and mentors, and they support new musical writing, and they offer an annual Mercury Musical Developments Award, the Stiles and Drewe Best New Song, and also a mentorship award, which is supported by the Musical Theatre International in Europe, and they've been supporting our students here this afternoon as well. It happens at all scales, the macro and the micro, and we're enormously grateful.
Thank you.
Now, as if that wasn't enough, we also are so delighted to have Nick Allott, OBE, here with us this evening. Nick is now the non-executive vice chairman, and for more than 20 years he was the managing director of Cameron Mackintosh Limited, a world theatrical producing group which includes Music Theatre International, which is, I think, the largest still,
licensing company.
Yeah, the largest licensing company of musicals, and also you're running
We own 8 West End
theatres, yes, through Delphont Mackintosh. Nick's worked with Cameron Mackintosh for over 40 years, and this afternoon he was leading a masterclass on producing, and it may just be that he knows of what he speaks. Because Nick was executive producer on the original London shows of Cats, Les Mis, Phantom of the Opera, Miss Saigon, Mary Poppins, and the London production of Hamilton. Amongst the many award-winning television and DVD versions, he also was executive producer of the movie of Les Mis, the Oscar-winning movie. Nick's also an amazing supporter of all kinds of performance and has been a long-time chair of Soho Theatre, trustee of English National Ballet, trustee of Oxford School of Drama, and of a Theatres Trust. He's been a trustee and director for some time of the Roundhouse, Camden, which is a really extraordinary theatre, and you've been involved with that for 20 years?
About 20 years,
yeah. He's also been a board member for the London 2012 Olympic Festival, and was the panellist for the UK City of Culture in 2017. He's a patron of the Shakespeare Schools Festival, and then he's been sucked off to serve in government and policy circles. He was part of the Mayor of London's Cultural Strategy Group, the Advisory Board for the Creative Industries Federation, and as managing trustee of the Mackintosh Foundation, he's been a cultural ambassador globally as well, going out for the great campaign. No wonder he got awarded an OBE in 2014 for services to charity, and the New Year's on that. So, Nick, Anthony and George are in conversation this evening, when I finally shut up, with our very own Dr Evelyn O'Malley, who is an expert in environmental humanities, open-air performance and musical theatre, and joy. I just have to throw that bit in because I think that's much the spirit of this evening. She's an award-winning author of Weathering Shakespeare and open-air performance, has been developing some amazing grant projects, including Singing and Dancing in the Rain, Climate Change as Youth Musical Theatre. So, at the end there'll be time for some audience questions, and we hope that you'll all come and join us for a drink outside afterwards, but I think it's time for me to shush now and pass the baton over to Evelyn and to our panellists this evening.
Thank you, Jane, for getting us going. And as Jane is speaking, I am struck listening to your careers by how many of us perhaps are in this room or indeed working in this department as a result of engaging with the kinds of productions that you would have produced during that period, and then segue to my own time training when everybody was singing. At the time it was 16 bar cuts of Wait a Bit from Just So was the song of the moment in the early 2000s. Yeah. So it's a real privilege to have the opportunity to get to speak to you. I think that probably many of us here have had engagement with your work in those ways. So what joy to have this opportunity to hear from you. I had the pleasure of listening to some of the singing in the workshops this afternoon as well, so I know we're in for a treat. So would you start off by telling us how you got started? How does one go from the various things that you were studying here at Exeter to producing and writing, making musical theatre?
Essentially, you can blame the photocopier in the Roborough reading room. Because we were both photocopying music, me for Gilbert and Sullivan.
Illegally.
I think it was out of copyright, but there just weren't enough copies of the piano vocal score for us to manage to do everything we needed to do when we were rehearsing. I was the conductor for the Pirates of Penzance for the University Musical Theatre Society for Gilbert and Sullivan, and you were
I'd formed a new society when I arrived here. I studied zoology and ecology when I came here, which I loved. I got my degree and I absolutely loved it. But my brother, I'm from a very musical family, my brother had written a musical when I was still at Maidstone Grammar School, and when I arrived here I thought I'll try and get my brother's musical on. There's a theatre right in the middle of the campus. So first of all I tried the Exeter Musical Comedy Society in town, and they said no, we only do well-known shows. So then I went to see Stuart Trotter, who was the artistic director at the Northcote, and I said, Stuart, there's a Gilbert and Sullivan week and there's a student drama week, would you let me have a week? And between him and John Clark, who was then the administrator, he said, yeah, you can have a week. March of my second year. And so I was getting a sense of who was the musical singing and dancing talent on campus. And I'd seen George in Utopia Limited in our first year, which they just produced at the Northcote. so I knew who he was. And then when I was photocopying my brother's music legally in the Rover reading room, there was this person photocopying GNS, and I thought he had to play a very old. I mean, he wouldn't need it now, but he had to play a very old man with grey hair back then. And I recognised him, and I said, "Are you George Stiles?" And he said, "Are you Anthony Drewe?" And we got thrown out for talking so much. And that's where it started. We just became friends, and I loved his production of Gilbert and Sullivan. It was that rocked up Joe Papp version. He came to see my production of Noble Sentiments.
It actually wasn't the Joe Papp version, it was a conventional production, but
you rocked it up.
I did a promo to get out and sell tickets in the town.
On Debonair Radio, I remember hearing.
Basically, at the time there was a big fad in the British charts called Hooked on Classics, which was basically any tune you might know from Classic FM now, with a backbeat to it at 120 BPM. So you'd have da 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 da, and it was a sort of mashup of all the big tunes. And I did the same with the best of the songs from Pirates of Penzance, with a very cheap drum machine and a bass synthesizer, and we took it out into the town and sang it in the shopping centre to try and drum up ticket interest.
So that's how we met, was in the Rover Reading Room. And a few years ago, I don't know whether you're aware of this, but they were selling all the University of Exeter signs on eBay. They were all green and silver. And I live in France for half the year, and I was at my house in France on eBay, and I'd put in like bazillions of pounds, knowing that at a minute to midnight I'm going to push go and nothing's going to beat me. And I bought Hope Hall, which is where I was a resident, the Rover Reading Room, where I met George, and the Northcote Theatre. So I've got those three signs up on my wall as a memento of my days here. But that's how we met, and we just became great friends, and we then decided we'd start writing together.
He'd not only blagged his way into Stuart Trotter and John Clarke's offices, but I had blagged my way into the theatre as a composer, because Stuart Trotter, when he arrived as artistic director of the Northcote, was determined that the, at the time, very frosty relations between the theatre's administration and the student body were thawed. He wanted students to be treating it as somewhere to come, not just to see plays and musicals, but to be part of the fabric of the building. And about my second week of the music department, my second study was flute. And I saw a sign up on the notice board in Knightley, which was the music department back then, much missed, saying, wanted flute player for a recording of Papagayna's tune from the Magic Flute, fee £5, apply to the sound department, Northcote Theatre. So I ran up the hill. Those days I was a very fit young man, 2 seconds, with my flute in my hand, and I said, I want to record this music for you. I vaguely knew how the tune went. And the sound engineer was a lovely man called Jonathan Goff, or officially Jonathan Porter Goff. He was a very posh man. And he recorded me playing ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba-da-ba-ba-bum, but a little bit higher than that. Papagayna's tune. I got my fiver. I took it to the slip saying, please pay the bearer £5 to John Clarke. He opened the little strongbox he had on his desk and gave me 5 crisp £1 notes, which I thought was enough money for beer for about 3 days. So that was good. And when I finished the recording with Jonathan, he said, do you know anyone in the music department who has a synthesizer? And my ears pricked up. And I said, yes, I have a synthesizer. And he said, could we borrow it? And I said, absolutely not. It never leaves my sight. It's my most precious possession. They were very unusual back in 1980. And it was a monophonic Korg synthesizer, one of those ones that you plugged little jack cables, rather like a telephone exchange in the old days, into little slots on the front of the synth. And it was a very newfangled piece of technology in those days. And he said, well, if you won't lend it to us, would you bring it and play it yourself? There is a young director doing a play here next month, and he wants to have an electronic score. Do you think you might be able to provide some noises for him? And I said, well, I'll meet him. So I came back the next day and I met a young Nick Allott, who was doing his second ever professional production, which was a play by Anthony Schaffer, who wrote Sleuth. And the play was called Murderer. And the play involved a 10-minute opening sequence when no words were spoken, but the audience appeared to witness a man murdering his girlfriend and chopping her up with a chainsaw in a bath and putting her limbs into black bin liners. A lovely beginning. And Nick had decided he wanted an electronic, a rather jarring electronic score to accompany this. And he said to me, I think maybe if you based something on the Te Deum, it would be good. You know, the Mass for the Dead. So I thought, well, Stephen Sondheim did it rather wonderfully in Sweeney Todd. With swing your razor high, Sweeney, swing it to the skies. That's all the ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-dee-da-dee, the plain chant for the Te Deum. And I was quite familiar with the liturgy in those days, because church music had been my big thing when I was at school. I was in the University Singers. We sang a lot of religious music in the University Singers. So I thought, well, I think I might be able to do this. So I said, well, if you want a very complex musical score, I'm going to need more than my one note at a time synthesizer. I'm going to need to layer up some stuff. So I asked the Northcott to hire me a multi-track tape recorder. And I got stuck into Stuart Trotter's office when he wasn't using it, basically in the afternoons and early evenings. And I wrote about 45 minutes of music for this production. And the Exeter Express and Echo newspaper did a front page story on me, which was under the wonderful headline, Boy Next Door Knew the Score. And there was a picture of me with 7 ranks of keyboards and a set of headphones recording the score, pretending I was recording the score. And I fell in love with theatre as I walked into rehearsals for the very first day. There was this community of actors and technicians and creators, and I was welcomed in a way that I just couldn't really believe. And I knew immediately I found my heart's home. I found my tribe, if you like. And I really never left the Northcott in the remaining 3 years of my time here. I wrote the score for 16 productions at the Northcott and was paid handsomely for the privilege.
I think we're very lucky because we arrived at the same time that Stuart Trotter arrived, and he was very, he's not much older than us, and he wanted to get this interaction between students and the Northcott. And I was telling the guys earlier today that he'd formed the Northcott Theatre Liaison Committee, which was on campus. So every department, including biological sciences, and I was the rep, had a position on this committee, so that Stuart and John Clark between them could say, this is what our season's going to be. Will you publicise it to the students in your department and let them know what's going on and let them know if there's any special deals on, put posters up. So next to a picture of a dogfish is a picture of Noel Coward play or something that I would put up. But we were very lucky that he opened the doors to the students and wanted more student access.
Yeah.
So Nick,
I can't begin to follow that. My arrival in Exeter is lost in the mists of time. I think the Northcott opened in 1968. I ended up in Exeter by mistake, I'm afraid to say. I was at an English fee-paying school, and for some reason they always believed that everyone had to go to university. I wasn't particularly academic, I wasn't very good at anything at school, apart from I loved acting, and I had one of those everyone should have on inspirational English drama teachers who loved the theatre and loved directing people within the theatre and loved taking us to the theatre. So I was incredibly lucky to be exposed from an early age to the West End, and I was at school in Surrey and the theatre in Guildford. Anyway, I loved English and I loved drama, and therefore I ended up here doing economics and economic history because I wasn't clever enough to get the grades necessary for English. And Exeter, I'll be honest with you, was not my first choice. In those days you had to put it in batting order, and I failed to get into Oxford, failed to get into Bristol, but ended up here. I didn't really know very much about it, apart from the fact it was a very long way away. Now, I have proudly 1/3 of a BA. I like to say that the letter I wrote to the university at the end of my first year suggesting I'd leave crossed in the post with theirs to me going, I think you're better off elsewhere. But Exeter was a wonderful place to be. It was a very small, intimate campus with 3,000 students. I understand there are now 20. I stood on the steps of Northcote this afternoon and looked, and literally buildings were there that I'd never seen before, so not quite all green fields. But anyway, so I stayed here, thinking that I would then apply to drama school, which is what I wanted to do in the first place. And whilst I was waiting to do that, I sold ice creams. I was the most successful ice cream seller in Exeter for a while, because I knew my way around the campus. And I would chase with my van playing the Happy Wanderer theme tune, being pursued by the university parking officers. I built, you should all be grateful to me, a large portion of the M5 bridge over Topsham. I'm the labourer there. But what I really wanted to do was work in the theatre. And I didn't know that the Northcote existed. And the Northcote, as you know, was part of that early experiment that the Gulbenkian Foundation did in placing theatres within university campuses to engage with the students. So, without knowing what I wanted to do, I knocked on the door and they said, thank you very much, go away, go away, go, and I kept doing it until eventually one day they said, oh, well actually, we've got the Ballet Rambert in next week, touring company, and the flyman's off sick. Do you know about flying? Yes, I said, I've got no idea. And so I turned up to work on Monday morning and I'll tell the slightly edited version of the story. It was a very hot day and I arrived, the Ballet Rambert had arrived and I was the first on stage. I was looking around waiting to be told what to do. And a very beautiful dancer called Lucy Burge, who was their principal dancer at that time, came on stage and looked at me and said, where's the ballet bar? I said, come on, you must have a ballet bar. Oh, for God's sake, I've got to warm up, give me your arm. So I stood there like that for half an hour while this unbelievably elegant person worked out on my arm. Like, you paid for this. This is my first day of work. Anyway, cut very quickly to the chase. I was taken on as a stagehand on a casual basis on a weekly rolling contract until the point when I was ready to go to the Bristol Vic Theatre School to study direction and stage management. And at the time, this is the 70s, don't forget, it was the theatre, like many industries, was still a closed shop. So you couldn't work unless you were a member of the union. Equity was the union. You couldn't get an equity card without a job, and you couldn't work without an equity card. So it was a catch-22 situation. And equity cards were handed out like gold dust. And the Northcote, along with the other regional theatres, had 2 a year to give out. And as I was about to leave, they said, well, why don't you stay and we'll give you an equity card. Oh, it's like winning the lottery. So I stayed as an assistant stage manager, and I stayed here for 3 years. And I can tell you it's a very strange and rather sentimental journey coming back today, because I left in September 1976, and this is my first time back. And as I said to the students, really bright bunch this afternoon, I owe this place an enormous debt of gratitude, because it was that vital first step. And it was, it was then you could still knock on a door and get in and learn and train on the job, which is almost impossible now for young people to do that. Yeah. So it was an incredible move for me. I didn't know it was going to happen, and I should always be grateful.
And how do you go from that moment when your training has continued to producing? What we know of as the mega musicals.
Well, we're going to do a really quick version of this. So I stayed here for 3 years. I met, again, I was saying today to students, no matter how clever and talented you may think you are, luck plays a very big role, and it's about the people that you meet along the way. And I met, rather than the same way I had an inspirational English teacher, I met an actor here called David Kelsey, who you knew, who was a director and actor, and he came to play the lead in a Christmas production of My Fair Lady. And he was just a magnetic personality. And the artistic director here was a man called Geoffrey Reeves, who was best known, I think, for being the legendary Peter Brook's assistant, Peter Brook, who led that extraordinary company all over the world, and finally pissed off with the state of English theatre, went and settled in Paris and created the Bouffe du Nord Theatre. Excuse me, Geoffrey was his assistant, and rather unusually ended up, because this was sort of perceived as a rather safe kind of, dare I say, commercial repertory theatre, and his theatre tended to be avant-garde. But he liked it here, and he offered me a job as his assistant to go somewhere else, and I thought about it. And at the same time, David Kelsey said to me, look, why don't we work together, because we get on very well. And I said, okay, and I chose him. He got me a job in Liverpool, and then he took over as artistic director of the Royal Theatre and Opera House, Northampton. Very grand name for a very small, beautiful theatre. And I went there in charge of the technical side. And the general manager did a midnight flip. and the board, literally, I promise you, said to me, "Do you have a suit?" "Yes." "Well, you speak quite nicely. Would you mind sitting behind that desk until we appoint a new general manager?" I was 22. Come on. Anyway, they didn't find anyone, and I ended up running the theatre for 4 years. And that was the next step before going to the West End and doing that, of which more later.
Nick, I just want to intercede for 2 seconds to say you used the word luck earlier, which I know we've all been very lucky. I love the definition, and I don't know whose it originally was, of luck, which is talent meets opportunity. And I think that's a very, very good definition.
Yes,
you have to have the goods to bring when the chance occurs.
Yeah.
But that's wonderful. You know, they said there's this empty desk, would you sit behind it in a suit?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
clearly you actually had to do slightly more than that to keep the job for 4 years.
Well, Kate pushed me a bit harder on my definition of luck this afternoon and said, "How do you know what choices to make?" And the answer is, you may be lucky enough to have some kind of knowledge that enables you to make that decision, but by and large you have to go on instinct. And so much of what we do as a profession is based on instinct and feeling. And I knew that working with Geoffrey wasn't going to be good, and working with David Kelsey was. And it was based on nothing other than just an instinctive feeling.
And so to return then to your instinct and your kind of moment when you begin to collaborate at Exeter, so how did you begin to realise that you might work well together?
Well, I literally thought I was going to be a biology teacher, and I had a place at St Luke's waiting for me. I hadn't graduated at this point. I did a show at the Northcote that my brother had written. George was in it. We became great friends. The night after that closed, we drove down to the Drum at Plymouth, and we saw a production of Sweeney Todd, and directed by David Kelsey, which I'd never seen a Sontaran show before, and absolutely loved it. I couldn't believe that a musical could do that, to be dramatic and terrifying and funny, all at the same time. And literally in the car on the way back, we said to one another, "Should we try and write a musical?" Which, when you're used to dissecting rabbits, is not an obvious choice. I've never written a lyric in my life. And
we'd never written a song together at
No.
that point.
But what I did love as a kid, from as early as I can remember, was listening to comic verse by Spike Milligan. I used to lie on the floor next to my dad's huge old gramophone, because the speaker was at the bottom, and I used to love, there was a poem, "Not last night but the night before, 3 tomcats came knocking at the door. One with a trumpet, one with a drum, and one with a pancake stuck to his bum." And as a 4-year-old, you think it's hysterical.
Yeah.
So I sort of pretty. I sort of got a sense of landing a gag in a poem. I was also a huge fan of Ronnie Barker when they did that song at the end of the Two Ronnies, and they'd written new lyrics to an existing song. I loved Flanders and Swan. I had Mud, Mud, Glorious Mud on my little record player on a single. I'd seen my brother writing musicals with his lyric writing partner. So I sort of knew the process. I'd been in musicals. And when George and I said, "Should we try and write a musical together?" we said, "Well, let's see if we can write a song." So I'd written a lyric that was very heavily based on is it Cameron Ebb? It's called He Touched Me. It's a Barbra Streisand song. I wrote this song, it was called I Saw Him. And it's almost mirroring the rhyming scheme of He Touched Me. I gave it to George, and George said, "Yeah, I can set that." So he played it to me on a church organ.
My principal study was organ.
Which is not a pretty instrument to hear a ballad sung. And his feet going. But we said, "Oh yeah, we can do that, we can write a song." We went and saw Stuart Trotter, and we said, "Stuart, can we go to the Northcote Theatre for next March?" And he said, "Yeah, okay." So we were subjecting ourselves to a bill of £2,750 to rent the theatre for the week. And then we had to do our degrees, so we went off and did our degrees, and then we thought, well, we better decide what the show's going to be about. And in 1972, when the Tutankhamun exhibition came to London for the first time, my dad was very into it, and he took all of us as kids to queue for like 3 3/4 hours going around those, like the post office thing, to get into the exhibition. And so I'd gone home after doing my finals, and on my dad's bookshelves are all these books about behind the mask, the gold of Tutankhamun. And I said, this might make a musical. And one of the books by Barry Wynne was called Behind the Mask of Tutankhamun, and it was kind of a novel version through the eyes of a military policeman who had been seconded by Lord Carnarvon to go and collect the equipment that the army had loaned them.
A novel written by somebody who, under any other guise, would have actually been a journalist for the News of the World. Or something. It was that level of insight.
But we thought this would make the basis for a musical. So we came up with this idea.
It's a rattling good yarn is what it is.
Yeah. We came up with the idea of setting our musical in 2 different timescales. 1922 AD, November, when they dig up Tutankhamun, and 1350 BC when they bury him. So we had this juxtaposition of the ancient Egyptians with the then modern day explorers.
And we discovered very early on this wonderful fact that the ancient Egyptians believed that you lived again after your death whenever your name was spoken by the living. And that assisted your journey across the night sky to be with the gods in the northeastern part of the sky. And so the very notion that by digging him up he lived again seemed to be, to us, an enormously poetic idea. So we played with the idea, well, what if he had died under mysterious circumstances, as the evidence seemed to suggest? Because nobody really knew quite who his parents were.
He was about 18 when he died.
Yeah, he was very young. He had a slight scoliosis of the spine, or whatever it's called.
And he had a,
any doctors
he had
in the house?
He had like a damage to his face on one side of his
yes, he
skull,
had an imprint in his
and
skull.
it was the same on the gold face mask. It looked like he might have been struck. And they now think that King I, who succeeded him and then went off with his missus, might have been the one who did the dirty deed. So anyway, this was kind of the backbone of our story. And we somehow, I don't know how we did it, but somehow we did it with a student cast, because we now graduated. We were living out in a little thatched cottage in Baltimore, pretending we're still students.
We still had our passes.
Oh yeah, we still had badges.
This is before the age of digital fingerprints and anything with a barcode or a magnetic strip. You just basically flashed this thing, which was red and green with your picture on it, and you got in anywhere.
But we got on very well with Paul Arnold, who was head of the arts on the top corridor in Devonshire House, and he said, yeah, you can still come and use the building. So we would use, Devonshire House and Cornwall House rehearsal rooms. We used a student cast, one of whom's here today, to be our cast. George's mum made lots of costumes. We asked the cast, the ancient Egyptians wore these little white sort of dish dash things with pleats in. We said to the cast, can you bring some sheets in? All these sheets started turning up with Durryard Hall stamped on them. We're chopping them all up and turning them into costumes for the ancient Egyptian scene.
With a lot of spray starch and a very hot iron, it's amazing what you can get.
And that was how it started, and we were just, we did 8 performances. We did all week, we sold out, we made some money, and somebody from Warner Brothers Home Video saw it. And we had breakfast at the Imperial Hotel, now Wetherspoons, the next morning with this guy, and he said, look, I'm not really in that department, but I think you should come and meet our international managing director. So George and I got the train up to London. We met Johnny Sterling, who was the international managing director, and he kept saying to us, I don't know what I'm going to do with you boys. He said, I like what you do, but I don't know what to do with you. And he had just signed, the same week as he signed us, Shaka Khan and Bananarama. And us. And he said, look, I'm going to give you enough money to live on for 2 years, because I think I'll have left Warner Brothers in that 2 years. And I want you to I want you not to become teachers, basically. I want you to have a foot up. So that was our luck. It was the luck that the man from Warner Brothers Home Video was in the audience, reported back to Johnny Sterling. Johnny took a shine to us.
It was also the luck that we not only had got our in at the Northcote, but we somehow hit upon a story that had dramatic legs. And somehow, although the writing was naive in the extreme, we did something right. And for the first time in my life, on the opening night, it was a Monday, I think, or was it a Tuesday by that stage?
Might have been a Tuesday.
We'd done technical rehearsals, we were pulling our hair out, we thought it was all going to be an absolute disaster. We had a live band, of course, I think 5 players, basically a pop band. It was a very pop-infused score. This big student cast, and we managed to get the orchestra pit at the Northcote is on a riser. It sinks down when there is an orchestra, and it rises up to form part of the forestage when there's no orchestra. And we had this bright idea that if we sunk it and built a steel structure inside it and put a false top on it and painted it to look like the rest of the Northcote floor, the audience would believe that it was just the normal thing. And the band was up on a platform we built at the side, and we filled the sunken D of the Northcote pit with the golden treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb. And just before the interval, having filled it with smoke and some
glitter ball,
this thing to the crescendo of my music and the entire company singing the name of Tutankhamun rose up silently out of the floor of the Northcote, revealing the tomb of Tutankhamun.
right in front of people's feet.
And
It was so
literally
amazing.
inches away from their noses. And at the end of that first performance, the entire audience stood up and cheered. I'd never seen a standing ovation in my life at that point. And we were so wowed by it, and I think we just thought, well, this is what we want to do for the rest of our lives. If we can move an audience to do that, and it happened every single one of the 8 performances, even the matinees, they stood and cheered. And it was just the most remarkable thing, and I think we just got the theatre bug at that moment, and it's never left us.
There's no turning back.
So then you've just been signed and your producing career is taking off. And what was the theatre industry like that you were entering into? It strikes me it's quite vibrant.
Yes, go ahead, Nick.
My producing career hadn't really taken off. I was running a rep theatre like Exeter, but doing everything as one did at that time. I mean, everything from running the acting company to the front of house, start the technical thing. And as I said, it was a baptism by fire. And London seemed very exotic and a long way away. And the aforementioned David Kelsey, who mentioned was the artistic director, he was offered a job directing a show on Broadway. Wow. And in fact, the show never happened. But he left, and his agent said to me, "You don't want to run the theatre in Northampton forever." And I said, "No, I don't." He said, "I'll write to a couple of people I know." Luck again taking a hand. And his letter to a young, struggling producer called Cameron McIntosh, who arrived on the day he was looking for someone to be the theatre manager for a hideous theatre called the New London Theatre, which had once been a rather beautiful Victorian theatre called the Winter Garden, but had been torn down and rebuilt as an office block, and the planning game was they put a theatre in the middle of it. It didn't really work very well as a theatre. Grease, starring Richard Gere, was the only show they'd ever had as a hit there, but it became a TV studio. And Cameron McIntosh, who had been by now befriended Andrew Lloyd Webber, was looking for a theatre to put in this musical called Cats, which nobody gave a snowflake's chance of surviving.
Has
Because
it not also become a nightclub venue called the Talk of the Town?
oh yeah, that was underneath it.
Okay.
A really, really seedy nightclub. But Cats was Andrew Lloyd Webber working without Tim Rice for the first time. The lyricist was a long-dead poet called T.S. Eliot. Trevor Nunn was directing it, who was the young director of the Royal Shakespeare Company, never done a musical. And to make it even worse, it was in this ghastly television studio. So the chairman of the previous board I worked for said, "Listen, we'll keep your job open for 6 months. You go." And of course, the show ran for 21 years. I mean, none of us knew. I was the front of house manager, dressed in a penguin suit, dealing with the hordes because it became not an overnight sensation, but at the time, what was it like? The 80s, we'd come out of the rather grim 70s. While I was here, it was a 3-day week. People were on strike a lot of the time, but beginning of punk. Exeter seemed a rather sort of cosy cushion away from that. But the beginning of the 80s, I mean, some of you might remember that, I mean, it was an extraordinary period of aspiration, and it was the beginning of the new romantics as far as music was concerned, and fashion was very flamboyant, and dare I say, Mrs. Thatcher wasn't quite as polarising then as she subsequently became, but what she'd done was sort of imbued a sense of optimism and national pride, and they were deregulating the finance industry, and everything seemed possible. And then to round it all off, of course, there was the royal wedding, and Charles and Diana got married, and all that surrounded the first British dance musical. The Brits didn't do dance musicals. We didn't do musicals, really. We had Evita, we had Jesus Christ Superstar, but anything that was any good came from America. So to do something based around dancers who could sing and act had never been seen before. And really the characters in Cats that become sort of embedded now were built around the people that they could find. So the big cat was built around Brian Blessed, who was massive, and this sort of young, small, sinuous one was built around Bonnie Langford. All of these people sort of stood around, and it was an incredible period. And I was saying this afternoon, I mean, the number of people that came through our doors at that time. I watched Paul Newman dance with his wife in my office, and I watched the now King of England attempt the splits. Because he came with Diana, and he said, "How do they do this?" And he said, "Let me show you, darling." And Diana dropped the perfect splits. preserving her modesty just. And Charles said, oh, I'll have a go at that, and failed. But it was a magical time for someone who just, worked in the provinces. But, and I'll finish on this note, cats became this international success, and the British had no tradition of retaining rights that they had created. So if you did a show in London, if it was to go anywhere else, if you were lucky enough, you'd get the right to co-produce it in America, and then after that you would basically give the rights back to the author's agent who would license it around Europe. But because Cats was so extraordinarily site-specific, and it was a very avant-garde production, and in a unique space, and people who saw it from overseas said, look, we want that production. So we said, we can only have that production if we do it with you. So we created the notion of actually hands-on licensing, which was the beginning of the expansion of Cameron Mackintosh that has continued to this day.
I also think it was the beginning of an age when theatre got savvy about how it marketed itself.
Exactly.
Not only the logo, but that brilliant tagline in all the newspapers, which used to run a column of every show that was running in London. Every day they printed in a sort of grid. And it always said, New London Theatre, Cats, the musical. No admittance when the auditorium is in motion. If there was ever a tagline that made you think, fuck, I want to see that.
The reason for that was Sean Kenny, the great theatre designer who designed the building, had put a great big revolve in there. And we thought, how can we use this revolve in the context of the show? And so we put 4 rows of seats on it and then turned it round. So when you came in, the people in what was traditionally the expensive seats in the front row had a massive row, dare I say, with Princess Margaret, who demanded to be moved when she sat down. I said, please, ma'am, trust me. I don't like secrets, I don't like secrets. But essentially, when the show started, the auditorium started to move, and the whole revolve came around, and the whole row, and 8 rows of seats turned around as well, and it fell into position, and at that point, rather like your standing ovation, the audience went nuts. But the marketing is very interesting, because the idea of logo imagery now is so important, whether it's the Nike whoosh or the golden arches from McDonald's. And there was a brilliant theatre designer called Russ Eglin who created the idea of the cat's eyes. You will have seen the image somewhere. These dark eyes with dancers in the middle of it. And it was Cameron Mackintosh who boldly, after a year of this, decided, well, how long before we can actually dispense with the title and just keep the eyes? And we waited until we got a review in America which previewed the show in London. It said Cats, now and forever. So we took away the cats and we used the cat's eyes, and after that we said the eye, now and forever. And then there was the Leamy's logo and the Phantom logo and the cycle.
That was 81, wasn't it?
81,
Cats.
yeah.
We were
81.
still here as students because we were very...
I remember seeing the cat's eyes on posters as you whizzed by on the train between London and Exeter.
Yeah.
So strong a memory of coming down here and seeing those eyes on the posters.
They're everywhere. If I just divert just for a second, there was an extraordinary incident on the first night, and again I was new to this world, and it was the time when the IRA were quite active in London, and we got to the first night. It was a fantastic success. Everyone was standing and cheering. We got to the curtain call, and I got a phone call from the stage door saying, Mr. Allott, we've had a call from the IRA and there's a bomb in the theatre. And I thought, how do I get people out without panicking? And the curtain call had started, and the audience was standing and cheering, and I went to see Brian Blessed and said, Brian, we've had a bomb scare, I need you to very quietly evacuate the audience. Whatever you do, use the word bomb. And he went, yes, I understand. And he marched down the front of the stage, and he stood and went like this to get silence, and the audience cheered, of course. So did it even more, so the audience cheered even louder. But eventually he looked at me like, so he whipped off his wig and said, get out, there's a bloody bomb! It's when I first learned about how phlegmatic the British are, because the Brits, everyone filed out, they tried to buy programmes on the way out. Please go. And my baptism of my fire was having to search the theatre with the bomb squad. Till we found there was obviously nothing there. And I remember, I said, okay, are we okay? And he said, yes, I think the theatre's safe. And I said, can I start the show again? And they went, that's up to you. And I thought, that's responsible. Anyway, fortunately, by now, the Cats company was dancing in the street with the audience all there. And and we all danced off to the first night party. Dramatic first night.
I've never heard that one before.
So you were aware of cats and these big logo shows. And how did you find yourselves entering this world?
Well, it was weird because there were, other than Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice, and then Howard Goodall, who was an Exeter boy, his dad ran Exeter School, who wrote The Hired Man, which Andrew then produced. There wasn't really anybody else British writing musicals. It wasn't as if it was an open playing field and loads of people were the trailblazers. We'd had Noel Coward, and we'd had Vivian Ellis, and we'd had David Henniker, Ivan Novello, people like that. But until Tim and Andrew came along, there was no one modern writing musical theatre. And so we had, other than the fact, well, we loved Sondheim from the other side of the Atlantic. There was no one to follow. So Sondheim, by seeing Sweeney Todd, inspired us to write, but we weren't following the footsteps of anybody else, and therefore there was not much mechanism out there for people to take on new musicals. And we were very lucky in that, so Tutankhamun had happened, we'd got the money from Warner Brothers, we started writing our next show, which was based on the Just So stories by Rudyard Kipling, called Just So. And we had met a man called John Dane, who ran the Barbican Theatre on the Hoe in Plymouth. And he said, I want to do your next show. So he said, okay, you can do it. It's Just So, it's based on Just So stories. This was in 1985. So January 1985, we started work on it. January the 2nd, 1985, we started work on it. We'd written 3 songs, and Stuart Trotter rang us up and said, the Performing Rights Society, who are the company who do your royalties, who get a song on the radio, have just launched a competition to honour Vivian Ellis, who was then 80. For his 80th birthday, instead of giving him a present, they wanted to launch a competition in his name to find new writers. And the entry requirements were a synopsis and 2 songs. And we had 3 songs. So we entered our synopsis and what we thought were the 2 best of the 3 songs. And it was judged by Cameron Mackintosh, Andrew Lloyd Webber, Tim Rice, Don Black, Mike Batt, David Henniker, the guy who ran the Guildhall School of Music and Drama.
John Hosier,
Dan Crawford, who ran the King's Head.
Amazing.
So there were all these names who we knew who they were, but we'd never met them. And
we've been in one room together before that.
I know. Oh, previous to that, I should say, when we'd written Tutankhamun, this was in the days of cassette tapes, we'd got a recording of it, and we knew that Cameron produced Sandy Wilson's The Boyfriend.
Yeah,
he produced The Boyfriend, and it was at Bromley. And it was the last performance at Bromley. George and I came up on the train with our script and our cassettes, and we thought we're going to sit in the lobby at the Churchill Theatre Bromley because Cameron's going to be here, and we roughly know what he looks like.
Brilliant, isn't it?
Small, busy, bossy.
Yeah, small and bossy, yeah, shouting a lot.
Yeah.
And so we're sitting in the foyer, and we see this man with big glasses and red socks.
And a double-breasted blazer.
We said, well, we think that's him. So we went up to him and said, Mr. Mackintosh. And it was Sandy Wilson. We never did see Cameron, so we got the train and went back home. So anyway, April 1985, we'd entered this competition. We got into the final. We came up to London. We saw the students at Guildhall, directed by Martin Connor, Were you there?
Yeah.
Alan J. Lerner was sitting behind us, very exciting. Some of our friends from Exeter were sitting behind us. They'd all come up to cheer us on.
Your mum, my mum.
Yeah, they were all there. And we won it. Which was, we couldn't believe it. We absolutely thought Charles Hart was going to win it, and Charles Hart, who wrote the lyrics of Phantom of the Opera, came second. So we won it, and they're doing a photograph of us for the press and everything. And Cameron Mackintosh, who he had got big glasses, he stood next to us, and he said to George, literally as the photographer's there, he said, so what are you going to do with the show now? And George turned to him, this is a very George thing to do, and said, well, what are you going to do with it? Cameron said, well, if you need any help with your show, give me a call. So we carried on doing our production down with John Dane.
Gave us his business card.
Down with John Dane in Plymouth. And it transpired that we needed some sound equipment. So we rang Cameron's office. We came up, and this was when you were in Museum Street. And Cameron's manager director then was a man called Martin McCullum. And he came and said, would you like a drink? And we thought he was the butler. It wasn't. And Cameron said, look, I'll give you the money. What do you need? So he gave us money to help put sound equipment into
And most
that.
importantly, he introduced us to a lovely man called Andrew Bruce, who was running a company called Autograph Sound, which was really the company that developed the use of head radio mics to amplify people in musical theatre. Prior to that, it had been rifle mics at the front of the stage, which picked up every footfall, and if you were in tap shoes, you clacked around when you entered stage left until you exited stage right. But Andrew and Julian Beach developed the technology for lavalier mics, which used to sit on your lapel, and they glued them to the side of people's heads and tried to bury them in the wig line or in their mutton chop moustaches. And they came down to Plymouth and gave us this amazing new technology. We were the trendiest thing, produced on £22.50, I would imagine, but with Cameron footing the bill for the sound.
Cameron flew down with Billy Hayward and Johnny Sterling to see the show. That was the guy who signed us to Warner Brothers. He flew down to see if his voice had come through. And Cameron was really good because he said, boys, I think you should go away and have a holiday. Forget about it. You're about 60% right, 40% wrong with the show. Go away and have a holiday, come back and rewrite it. Well, what he should have said is, it's 90% wrong, 10% right. The idea was kind of good. But he knew that if he'd said that to us, we might have given up. And so he was encouraging, he was like, I like him actually.
Yeah.
He was very encouraging to have that sort of sense of our psychology. And so that's what we did. And I mean, eventually, that show, we wrote it in 1985. Cameron co-produced it at the Watermill, directed by Julia Mackenzie in 1988. It went to the Goodspeed Opera House, I think, in 1998. But in between times...
We went to the Tricycle.
Or went to the Tricycle in London.
Can I tell the Tricycle story?
You can.
I was on the board of the Tricycle, which is now called the Kiln, was a wonderful, I won't say community theatre, small theatre in the middle of Kilburn, specialising then in Caribbean and Irish work. But because it was Cameron and because I was on the board, they agreed to take this musical, and it was charming and wonderful, and someone mentioned some of the songs today, and you did this. I mean, really, really fantastic. And Cameron's plan was to try it out at the Tricycle Stroke Kiln and bring it into the West End. But the reviews weren't quite good enough, didn't quite land. And so he said to me, we've got to take George and Ants out and explain that it's not going to transfer. And so we went up there and we went out to dinner. I can remember that the evening, and we all got very, very pissed. And Cameron said, look, I love it, it's really, really great, but I'm afraid I just don't think it's ready to transfer into the West End. And we all went off miserable into the night. And the next morning I went into the office and Cameron said, where are George and Ants? I don't know, at home. Get them in now. Why? Get them in now. And I rang you and said, can you come in and talk to Cameron? Why? I don't know. Just
you weren't. It was just me. You were away.
That was the way.
It was just me.
And anyway, so you came in and Cameron produced this letter. And it said something along the lines of, dear Cameron, one of my people was in London last week and went to this theatre in North London to see a show, which I think you're connected with, called Just So. They really liked it, and I'd like to option it for a movie. Love, Steven Spielberg.
So Cameron gave me the letter. I had a photocopy and I had it framed. I gave it to you. That was
and you did, and
it was amazing. So we spent 2 weeks with Steven Spielberg with Cameron. The funny thing was, George and I had flown in. Cameron had been staying at Jeffrey Katzenberg's place in Manila, I think. And I borrowed his car. Foolish man, Jeffrey Katzenberg. And Cameron had driven into LA. We were staying at Universal Sheraton, the Universal Studios, and they gave us a car, and it was about 3 steps to the studio. We had to have a car to get to it. And
can't walk anywhere.
And Cameron said, I'll meet you in a restaurant called Chopsticks on Hollywood Boulevard the night before. This amazing. I mean, I was absolutely in seventh heaven to be in Hollywood. And we had this lovely meal, and Cameron said, now boys, you've got to be very cool, calm and collected. You must be very professional in this meeting. And we were absolutely laid back about the whole thing. He was the one who was shaking when we went in, and all nervous. And there's a song in Just So called Does the Moment Ever Come? And Spielberg had this amazing bungalow at Universal Studios. The door knocker was E.T. There was a well with a Jaws shark coming out of it. And he had like a playroom with dinosaurs. He was about to make Jurassic Park. He had a playroom with these dinosaurs and things, and a piano. And we went there 2 or 3 times because he wanted us to sing Does the Moment Ever Come? Because that was his favourite song in the show. It was really, really exciting.
Cameron did a brilliant Cameron thing. In the early conversations with Steven Spielberg, he said to him, well, of course, you're not the only one who's interested in the show. And the other letter we've got is the one that says, Dear Cameron, I do understand that my least favourite people in the world at Disney have made you a counter-offer, so I think we need to proceed at maximum speed with the option for just so. I'm prepared to pay you $1,000.
It was good money.
It was amazing money. We literally lived on it for 3 years. Our share of it, because of course the main money went to Cameron because he was
and it was $2 to a pound back then. It was at that point.
But
it was so exciting.
The flight out to Los Angeles was the first time we ever turned left when we went onto an aeroplane. Of course, we've never looked back, and it's all easy.
So, from having never looked back, we're going to open up to questions in a while. So it would be really nice to, I mean, obviously, so much is history in what you tell us, and you get to this point where you change the industry. You are at a point now where you're also nurturing new talent, new writing. If you were to think about what the industry is now, and what are the significant moments of change you feel that occurred between where we've left off and what brings us to where we are now?
Just before I answer that, just a last little bit of colouring in. I talked something about the 80s, which was an incredible decade, and in that period, we did Cats, Les Miserables, Phantom of the Opera, Follies, Miss Saigon. And as Cameron said to me at the end of the decade, he said for a producer to have one hit of the size of Cats in a lifetime is incredible, to have 4. And there was something about the 80s that encouraged that, but also, and this is only my theory, it's never been tested, but we were able to fill a gap in New York because of AIDS. And the AIDS had decimated the creative community in New York, and very little really good new work was being done. I mean, I think Dreamgirls and 9, but the English mega musical, which was by and large scorned by the American press as being inconsequential and all about spectacle and nothing about heart and spirit, sort of moved in. And by the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, between Cameron and Andrew, because of the proliferation of companies of these shows, there were 6 companies of Les Miserables in North America simultaneously at one point. Because of that, they were employing 65% of all the actors in America for about 2 to 3 years. And it was an incredible period, it really was. And I don't think we will ever see that time again. But diving into where are we now? Gosh, well, we're in a very different place. And I think a lot of it is to do with COVID and lockdown. I think it was a hammer blow to the industry, to its confidence, to its fiscal future and reliability, and as you know, decimated the creative community. I think we probably lost somewhere between 25 and 30% of our freelance staff, creative staff, who simply couldn't survive on the rather inadequate financial provision that had been made by government for freelancers. I mean, not intentionally, just the way the deal worked just didn't work for them. So we lost a lot of people. And in that time, there was a lot of soul searching. If you remember, it was the time when Black Lives Matter had happened at the same time. And we, as a result, did a lot of, no one could work, the theatres were all closed, we did a lot of what we call town hall meetings with our actors, talked about their lived experience, and really quite shocked at some of their experience, particularly from the actors of colour who had really had a very, very tough time and just kept quiet about it. And people became far more open, with the result that when we went back to work, quite clearly, people needed to express themselves in a different way. And the work that was created immediately, perhaps overcompensated in a way, but it had definitely changed. The other thing, which was not so good, was that the costs completely escalated. And the big difference between now and then is the crazy cost of producing commercial theatre, and in particular in America. I mean, in America now, when we started doing musicals in the 80s and 90s, you know, the Mary Poppins that is about to open in Bristol, I think, cost in New York $8-9 million. No, actually, it's a bit more than that. Probably about $10 million. I mean, a show of that size now in New York costs $25 million. The cabaret that Eddie Redmayne did, which some of you may have seen in London, cost £3 million in London, with another £2 million to convert the theatre. exactly the same production in New York has cost $26 million. And you're never going to get that money back. And I think, rough rule of thumb, I think last season, and Broadway is very seasonal compared to the West End, last season somewhere between $300 and $350 million was lost. Simply because of the economics. It's a very.
And that's with shows that are getting loads of Tony Awards.
Yeah.
Like
absolutely.
Some Like It Hot and Shocked.
Winning prizes, but
they won all these prizes. They did like a year.
Yeah, exactly.
And a few years back, they'd be like a guaranteed 5-year run.
Yeah.
My colour on this is that I think we went from an age of subsidised theatre and subsidised arts in this country, the glory years perhaps of the late 70s, early 80s, and we went into this much more hard-headed commercial world of the mega musical and to some extent the mega play, things like Stephen Daldry's An Inspector Calls for the National that became a globalised rollouts production. Interesting given that it was such a political play when it was originally written, and I think Daldry managed to make it that all over again.
Yeah.
But the strange thing, and you mentioned the AIDS crisis that happened in the 80s, of course, as well, which was right at the beginning of our creative life in London. But what also grew up, as well as this very hard-headed theatrical production in the absence of the subsidised support of the regional theatres of this country, was also a sense of community, which was forged out of the adversity of the HIV/AIDS crisis. And from that grew an entire network of support and performances and money raising, and indeed individual philanthropy, particularly from people like Cameron, which was extraordinary, to actors that Cameron had worked with who became sick and were either still in his employ or would have been in his employ.
No, you did.
And it was an amazing thing, and I think it taught us that there is a sense that we must all look after each other, a bigger sense of society, that it's not just about getting a job and earning a crust, it's about what is it, what is the world, what is the society that we live in, what does it want to look like? And I think we've realised again since the COVID pandemic that we actually can shape that, and we must shape that. We must create something that is sustainable in that respect.
The subsidy point's very interesting because you're right, and in the 70s, hard to believe. I think we felt pretty good about it, and then VAT was introduced on theatre.
Yeah.
So, oh my God, we protested about that. But what we did was we combined the skills of the subsidised sector with sort of commercial nous. So we were blending. So Phantom of the Opera was directed by fantastically famous Broadway director called Mark Prince, who did Evita originally. I mean, a legendary Broadway name, but he was working with a creative team, British creative team who'd brought up in the subsidised sector, like Maria Bjornsson, who had been brought up with the Royal Shakespeare Company and the Royal Opera House. And that blend of commercial nous with subsidised creativity, sort of, it worked very well. And then interesting, when we tried to take that into Europe and we realised how much better European arts was supported financially by the governments, both national and regional, than we were at home, we were faced with a problem because we needed to take European theatres for a block of time. We needed, 9 months to a year for production of Les Miserables, and they could only give us 5 to 6 months because they had opera festivals and ballet festivals within their subsidised buildings. I remember looking at a theatre in Munich and going with the theatre owner to look at the Bavarian State Opera and realising that opera house in Munich, subsidised entirely by the city, received more than the RSC National, English National Opera and Royal Ballet all together, and this was one regional theatre. But so the answer was that German entrepreneurs started building theatres for us. And actually there were about 7 or 8 really big, wonderful commercial operating theatres in Germany that were built specifically for those productions. So the theatre in Stuttgart was built for Miss Saigon, the theatre in Frankfurt was built for Les Mis and Hamburg.
Where we did Poppins.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yes, was there anything, Anthony, that you would like to add to that about your...
I would like to add. Well, I mean, only going on from what George said, I think as we've got older, we've realised that musical theatre has become so popular. From when George and I started out, and I say it was Andrew Tim, Howard Goodall, the late Stephen Oliver wrote a show actually when we were around the time of Tutankhamen called Blondie with Tim Rice that started
We
with
produced.
Bath. Yeah, you produced. Then came with the old Vic, didn't it? And then which I love. That field has opened up because musicals have become so popular. I mean, to the extent of people get absolutely delirious about going to them again and again. I mean, George is one of the producers of Six. There are people who go to that every night. We wrote Half a Sixpence, and because Charlie Stemp, our lead boy, was so amazing, there was a bunch of girls who came in every night. They went on that student rush thing. To the extent they became annoying because they're singing along with us. These other people who paid more for their tickets don't want to see that. They want to see Charlie. But George and I, in 1992, became founder members of a charity now called Mercury Musical Developments. And it's now, back then there were 28 members. And there are now over 400. And they're all people trying to write musicals. And they're all people who may not be getting the lucky breaks that George and I got by meeting Johnny Sterling, who said, I don't know what to do with you boys, but I'll give you some money. Cameron, I mean, what we used to do with Cameron was, if we ran out of money, we would ring Martin McCullum, the one we thought was the butler, and we had this code, Martin, we need some more bacon sandwiches. And he would send us a bit more money, so we kept selling some bit more rights in Just So to Cameron's office. But that doesn't exist so much anymore. So through Mercury Musical Developments, all these people are writing musicals. I mean, a brilliant one opened last night, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, opened last night in London. So a few years back, 16 years or so ago, George and I founded the Stiles and Drewe Prize to try and give something back to these young writers. And we were very lucky that we got MTI to co-sponsor it.
It's a licensing company.
Yeah, a licensing company. So every year we do a Best Song Prize. So the membership of 400 are invited to submit a song. And there's £1,000 for the first prize. And this year we had 202 entries out of the 400 members. And we're doing it on, tickets available by the way, December the 2nd at the Other Palace in London. And then we had the idea that we would actually mentor some writers. So we started this about 6 years ago, 12, must be 12 years ago, we do it every 2 years. And they had to submit a complete musical.
First draft.
First draft of a complete musical, because it's a long thing. And we have various judges who help whittle the numbers down so that we don't have to read all of them. We get about 45 entries a year. And it takes about 3 hours to read a musical properly and make your notes as you're going and listen to it and see, did I understand that? Yeah, I did, but I only understood it 10 pages later, so that needs sorting out. And there's a prize for that. Whoever wins that every 2 years comes and stays in my house in France for a week with George and I. And we talk about how they wrote their show, then we pull it apart, we put it back together again, we sometimes suggest a new song or a missed song opportunity. They have a week with us, then later in the autumn they get to share 20 minutes of it with an invited audience of Mercury Musical members.
And a professional cast.
And director, yeah, who perform it. And then we do a talk back and we talk about it and people can ask questions. We do another 20-minute one in the spring. And then at the end of their year, they get a full stage reading at the Other Palace Theatre with a band and with a cast. And 2 or 3 of them have gone on, which is thrilling. The season, which became called Two Strangers Carried Cake Across New York, ran at the Kiln and then came into the West End. And that was one that we mentored. The writer of Curious Case of Benjamin Button, we mentored. His show was called The Wicker Husband, opened at the Watermill. Another one called After Elijah has been picked up by ATG. So we sort of feel like we're giving something back. And the interesting part about it is, and I always, when they arrive in France, I say, now, we're just writers. We don't have the answers. We still get bad reviews, we get good reviews, you never know. We're just writers, and what we're going to do is give you some of the knowledge we've learned, and we'll ask the sort of questions that we've been asked over the years about your show. And what we find we're doing is we're enunciating sort of rules that we never knew we were following because we're having to now impart them to somebody else. Stuff we learnt on the hoof kind of thing, we're able to pass on.
A concept that I think was drilled into me in an extraordinary way, again, when the same moment that we met with Cameron McIntosh at the Vivian Ellis Prize, and Cameron said, what are you going to do with it now? And I said, I don't know, what are you going to do with it? As we shook hands with Vivian Ellis himself, the composer, he said to me, I want you to know you are now just 4 handshakes away from Beethoven. I said, sorry, you better explain that. He said, well, you probably know that I was a contemporary when I was writing and having all my successes with George Gershwin. He was backing and throwing across the Atlantic with his shows, and I was doing the same. So George and I were great friends, and you probably know that George studied orchestration with Maurice Ravel. And I didn't know that because I'd written my dissertation on Porgy and Bess when I was at Knightley for my final degree. And so I knew all about Gershwin, taking a year out to go and study orchestration with Maurice Ravel. And he said, and Ravel, when he was a very young student in Paris, was lucky enough to meet a very old and very deaf Beethoven. So Beethoven shook Ravel's hand, Ravel shook Gershwin's hand, Gershwin shook Vivian's hand, and Vivian shook mine. Sorry, that's 5 handshakes. So at that moment, the concept of time and lived experience kind of exploded in my mind. And I just thought, this is extraordinary. Beethoven feels like, you know, he's an etching with a wig and an ear trumpet, and now suddenly he's just this man's hand away from me. And I couldn't believe it. And so the very notion of that, I think, is what's sort of laying behind the wish to mentor and to give whatever we do know on. Because of course, as they say in theatre, the big truth is that no one knows anything.
But I know we're running out of time. I mean, I think there's nothing more important now. What you're doing is incredible. Is encouraging the young and bringing on the next generation. And the point I made this afternoon is in the recent wonderful report, if you haven't read it, called The State of the Arts, which was commissioned by the Campaign for the Arts in Warwick University. It has the terrifying statistic in the last 10 years, there's been a 24% reduction in drama teachers. And there's been a 50% cut in higher education in terms of high cost, presumably, I mean, art degrees. 29% people have less GCSEs and A-levels being art subject. It's really, really important we somehow get arts back onto the curriculum. Because without it, I don't know where the next generation will come from. I'm on the board of the Roundhouse, which you kindly said, and when I started 20 years ago, we used to see 200 to 300 young people a week to encourage their creativity, whether it be spoken word or verse or dance or singing or circus and or radio. And last week we celebrated this year alone seeing 10,000 young people just from London, and I mean the feedback from that is incredible. So we're old now. That's our mission.
It's sad, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's exciting.
Thank you. There's just so much here. I'm sure we have so many questions we could ask, but it strikes me coming out of these stories, and I know we're only getting snatches of them, but there's such care goes along with that kind of sense of creativity, community, the sense that actually the practice, the doing, the making is worthwhile, and how that is sustained, you know, whether that's financially or through support or mentoring, but yes, comes out really strongly. It would be lovely if we could open up the conversation, perhaps, to our friends and colleagues here. Yes?
We've answered 2 of my questions, so I won't ask those about education and about finances. So I'm going to ask you about composing. When you write musicals, and when all of the great musicians write musicals, do they just start with a melody and chords and then somebody else does the orchestration, or do they have to do it themselves?
That's a great question, and of course Gershwin and Ravel was an interesting point. Gershwin wanted to write an opera, which of course turned out to be Porgy and Bess, and I think he wanted to do that because he felt that there was perhaps a slight limitation in the form of Broadway musicals, which is the medium he had naturally fallen into as a prolific songwriter with his brother Ira. And at that time, generally, if you wrote musical theatre, you wrote the tunes, you scribbled them down if you were literate on a piece of manuscript paper, and you handed it to a chap who then scribbled it out into parts for a violin, a trumpet, a saxophone, trombone, and so on. And then the next night that would be handed out around the pit, and that song would suddenly go out into the world. But they generally started as music for piano and voice. And the tradition was, because Gershwin wrote so prolifically, and his contemporaries, Irving Berlin, Cole Porter, and so on, they wrote so prolifically that sometimes they had a musical in production, and the management would say, we need a better company number for the second act after the principal woman leaves, you need to write me a big up-tempo number with a tap break. And so they go away overnight, burn the midnight oil, drink a lot of whiskey, and the next morning there'd be a new number on the manager's desk. The Gershwins would come in and play it and sing it. And he'd say, right, it's fabulous, it's going in tomorrow night. And so the process of getting it choreographed, costumed, orchestrated was so fast that there wasn't any way in hell that these exhausted writers could possibly orchestrate it in time. So this became this entire subset of Broadway musicians who orchestrated other composers' works. And when Gershwin wanted to write Porgy and Bess, he knew he wanted to create the entire sound world of the opera. And so he went off to Europe to study with Ravel so that he could do so. And of course, the sound world of Porgy and Bess is absolutely unique to Gershwin.
By the way, I've seen these two do the late night with a bottle of whiskey. Create a new song overnight.
We have.
Really demanding producer going, it's not working here, I need a new number by tomorrow.
Literally,
Yeah,
on the spot.
really,
Yeah.
very impressive.
But nowadays, it tends to be, I mean, George, sadly, he lost use of his arm 5 years ago. George played the piano like an orchestra. It was unbelievable. And when we used to write songs together down in France, I'd give him a lyric. I'd see him walking around the garden trying to work out what the rhythm was I got in my head when I wrote this lyric. And then he would sit at the piano and he'd start playing around with it. And it was left-handed. So it usually started with something going on in the left hand before he put the melody on. And then I'd usually gone upstairs to bed with my dog, and then I would hear him play the piano like Rachmaninoff. And I thought, oh, yeah, he's got it. I go to sleep now, he's got it. But then the orchestra, we were very lucky, we worked with this amazing orchestrator, the late Bill Braun, and he used to always want to watch George play the piano before he orchestrated the show. I mean, between George, Bill and Cameron would have worked out how big a band we could afford for the venue, and then George and Bill would talk about what the lineup might be for the band, but Bill wanted to watch George play the piano because he could see where George's heart and soul was within that, what he was doing on the piano, and he would then go away and orchestrate it.
It's a great question because the truth is, even though I never actually orchestrated a show myself, or haven't yet, I would always have a very strong idea of the sound world of the music, because, you know, musicals are about storytelling, and therefore you've got to have a very strong idea. What is the world that I want to conjure with the sound of the music? So early questions in my mind are always, does it feel contemporary? Does it feel classical? Does it feel pop? Does it have a sort of dark edge to it? Is it a joyful, happy edge? Does it dance? Or is it principally lyrical? And I literally would improvise, often with the script in front of me before any lyrics had arrived. I would just improvise sounds, ideas, themes, and just get a world for it, really, I suppose. So from that, I would often start to imagine the orchestra, and whether it was strings and brass and woodwinds, or whether it was synthesized guitars, drums, and so on. And from that, you sort of conceive the music with those sounds in your head. So even though you're not actually committing every single violin note to paper yourself, you know how it's going to come together as an idea.
And Chatham House rules, please. It doesn't always, within the creative team, people don't always agree. So we did a musical many years ago called The Fix, which was about an American election and corruption and some current thing. How did we know? Anyway, and it was to be at the Donmar Warehouse, and Sam Mendes was going to direct it, and Cameron took it, and it was by two young American writers called Dempsey and Rowe, who went on to write a big show for us on The Witch of the Beastwick, and this was one of their first shows. And we took it to Sam, and it was a piano score, and Sam said to me quietly, I know exactly how this sounds. This is 80s guitar band. It's like all those 80s, like Blur and Notice, this is how it needs to be. And I went, wow, good luck getting that past Cameron. And when Cameron comes, oh, absolutely, you're mad, dear, don't be silly, it's a traditional score. And Sam went, no, you can just see it like that. And of course, that whole pop world was completely alien to Cameron. So he ended up with the score that he wanted. But there were two completely different approaches to the same piece of music.
But as a lyricist, I never know what it's going to sound like, because I don't know what's going on in his head. All I know is how he's playing the piano, which sounds amazing. And occasionally, when I then hear it orchestrated, it's slightly disappointing, because I've got so used to George playing it amazing on the piano, I understand the parameters of a piano. I don't understand when that's become a tuba, and that's become a flute, and that's become a violin. But when he played the piano, it was like the orchestra was there, and I could absolutely hear it.
Yeah. When the authors of Les Miserables say, I mean, Michel Schoenberg and Alain Boublil work out the entire story before Michel puts his hand on the piano, and then Michel writes a piano score, and then Alain Boublil creates the songs on top of that, lyrics on top of that. Tim Rice and Elton John and all those great Disney musicals they did, they never met during the writing process. Tim would write a lyric and email it to Elton, who would then compose a song around that, and then meet in time with the band calls. So everyone works in a different way.
I used to, in the place in France, I would be in the kitchen writing.
Yeah.
George would be in the living room with the piano, and I might email him. and then he, because I'm not going to listen.
No.
So, and he thinks I can't hear. It's only on one wall away. And occasionally I'll say, that thing you were doing half an hour ago, I really like that. He said, why didn't you tell me? I said, I'm not going to be listening. And he'll send me an MP3 when he's got something, or he wants to change it slightly. He'll send me an MP3 next door, so I can then change the lyrics slightly.
We have another question.
Yes, I was going to ask whether, or how many people in the audience had stood on that stage in 1984, wearing not very much, but I know there's at least one other person there.
Were you?
You've got Pierre Lecow and...
No!
Yes. Mine was a Burke's Bed strip.
Wow!
And I suppose my real question is, have you thought, should we go back to that, or is it past?
Do you know, we do get asked this quite a lot. That was in '84 we did it, Pierre Lecow. That was in 1984.
Was it also
In
it was 83, no, it was 84.
It was 84. Yeah, it was 84. We wrote it in 83. Yeah, they met on it and they got married. We wrote it in 83. We graduated in 83, so we wrote it in 83. It was on March 84. And that was, March 84. 1992 was the 70th anniversary of the discovery in 22. And there's a big company in London called Imagination, and Gary Withers, who runs Imagination, had heard our recording. He said, can we do it in the Imagination building? Which is basically one row of houses, another row of houses, and a street in between, joined together to make a building. So you've got this huge atrium that used to be a street down the middle of it. And it was on...
with a tensile roof between the two.
And on like five levels. And he filled the stage acting area with sand, with chairs like this sort of sitting on the sand, and the audience came and we had a huge orchestra, and we had all the ancient Egyptians appearing on these bridges that went across between the different levels within the building. And we did it with the late Martin Smith played Howard Carter, the late Dennis Quilley played Lord Carnarvon, Sally Ann Triplett played Lady Evelyn Herbert. I can't remember who played Mermaid Herbert in that one. It was an amazing cast.
It was a great event, and I can tell you the insanity of this delightful man.
Yeah.
The sand was imported from Egypt. The waiters that provided the drinks also came from Cairo because he wanted genuine waiters to actually...
And there were little gold face mask chocolates to give to the guests.
I have no idea how much
I know, it
cost. But it was an amazing night. And Cameron brought Baz Luhrmann to see it, remember?
Yes, he did, yeah that's right. But people do keep asking, and maybe one day. The problem with the Tutankhamun story is that it's very. We've worked with Julian Fellows a lot, and Julian, as you know, wrote Downton Abbey, set at Highclere Castle, where Lord Carnarvon came from. And we said maybe Julian should work on it, and we'll do this Soleil Lumiere production outside Highclere Castle. And I did meet the young Lord Carnarvon, who was then Lord Rochester. So we might, but the problem with the story is that it's very exciting leading up to the moment how Howard Carter finds the tomb and gold comes out the floor. And that's it's hard to top that. And yet all the interesting stuff about the curse of the pharaohs and Lord Carnarvon dying and these weird things that happen, like his dog died at the same time back home in England. And did you die?
Yeah.
Mervyn Herbert died. A whole bunch of people died. And it all happens after he's found the thing. So unless we had some way of changing the timescale slightly.
Plus, of course, it's all a story about colonialism and about the patriarchy stamping all over the Egyptian culture at the time, and coming in and, you know, basically turning it into a press circus to rah, rah, rah for the English. Well done for finding this brilliant tomb, chaps. So
But
it's
the
not
obsession,
necessarily
the
a
story of obsession is quite interesting. Howard Carter's obsession was still
it
a tomb
absolutely
to be found.
is. It is, and the idea of this saying the dead king's name and making him live again, I think is very potent. So I think there is a story in there. It's
That's
just how
certainly one thing
you
that's stuck
frame
in
it
my
for the
mind.
times.
Yeah.
Standing up there, Tutankhamun live again. And
Yeah.
you mentioning the cave wonders coming out of the stage, and of course you're reminding me that we swapped over. You put us out the
It was
front.
something I wanted to do because we all knew what it looked like.
Oh,
when
that's
it-
right.
when it
That's
came
right.
up.
We put the stage crew in the
I was in the
costumes.
stage crew.
That's right, Jonathan Posner, I remember.
Yeah.
So that all the cast could sit in the auditorium and
Yeah.
see this thing happen.
We borrowed all their loincloths and then appeared on top of the boxes when the thing went up.
Yeah.
So they could all see it. They could all see what it looked like.
And I had to learn how to paint floor like this because we had gone, it was Donkey's Years by Michael Frayn that was in there before us, and because we were worried about the short tech time, we had got in early and sunk the floor, put the scaffolding, built the force floor, and Lynn Wright, I think she was called, who was the props mistress, taught me how to paint floor with streaks in it. It was like a wide brush. You put a bit in tan and a bit in dark brown, and you just let the brush streak it up and down, and then with a black marker pen and a ruler, do the cracks in between. And people came to see Donkey's Years, and they had no idea that they were walking over a false floor, because it looked like this sort of flooring.
And we also built the pyramid, which is the opening scene,
Yep.
with the sarcophagus lying on the top of the
Yeah.
pyramid.
Yes.
Patrick
And
Houston.
we went to, there was a hall, I think it was somewhere in, I don't know, I can't remember, somewhere in Exeter. And we took over this hall to build the pyramid, and we built the pyramid, and then we looked at the pyramid, and then we looked at the door. And then we looked back at the pyramid, and then we looked back at the door. And we realised that there was absolutely no way, whichever way you turn this triangular structure, that was going to get out of that door. So in the end, we chopped the top off. I don't know if you remember this.
Yes.
We chopped the top off and hinged it. But that severely weakened the whole structure. So I'm here to tell you, everyone, that every single night that that show was on, I was inside the pyramid. I had two handles on either side, and I was holding the whole place. So when Cameron McIntosh was watching it, I was inside holding
Amazing. It's beginning to feel like, to me, like this jolly conversation needs a bit more wine from everybody. And we've got some just outside. It feels like so many reminiscences and thoughts and past friendships are coming to light that it would be good for those to have more space. So could we all take a moment to thank Nick, Anthony and George for their...
And on behalf of us, thank you, Exeter, for in all of our cases.
Yes, thank you for
launching
listening
us
to
and
three old white
apparently
men
making
going
us
on.
award-winning theatre. They
Yeah, we're legends.
Please join us for wine outside and we'll carry on the conversation.